All right, so we are making our way through Unit 3 of the Obedience of Faith. And Unit 3 is Commendation from God, Part 1, which is Kings. And so we're looking at those who were commended by God, who were regarded as faithful in the sight of God. And we've made our way to point D of Unit 3, which is David. Now, David was king over Israel for 40 years, but David came to our attention as a teenager when he was anointed king, probably about 15 years before he became king of Israel. Well, we're going to look at the life of David, and just like we did with Saul, we're going to go through attribute by attribute. Now, Saul, we could do that more in a chronological way. It wasn't perfectly chronological, but David is not going to be so much because his character is revealed in many different scenes of his life. And so you can follow along in the study guide. We're going to go through attribute by attribute of why he was commendable in the sight of God. Well, just as we started in Saul's life by pointing out Saul's outward appearance, remember, Saul was taller than all the other Israelites. He was young and handsome and strong and tall. So he was the one that all Israel thought, yes, his outward appearance, that's the leader we want. That's the king we need. But David wasn't necessarily the one that you would pick if you were looking at a crowd of people and thinking who's going to be the next king of God's people. And so this is what happened with Samuel. The Lord sent Samuel to anoint the next king of Israel because God had told Samuel that he was taking the kingdom from Saul and giving it to a man after his own heart. And Samuel was sent to the household of Jesse. Well, David was the youngest of 8 brothers. So there were 7 other brothers who were in the house, and Samuel thought it must be one of them. David was this little runt of a teenager out in the field tending the sheep. And so he wasn't the one that people were expecting was going to be anointed as the next king. But let's look at 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. This is what the Lord said to Samuel. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him." So that's when Samuel is looking at all of David's brothers. And he's bringing up, don't look at the height, look at the heart. So God goes on, "For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So this is why the Lord chose David. He was looking at David's heart. And we'll jump to verse 12. "And he sent and brought him in." So that's bringing David in from the field with the sheep. Now, David was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. Now, what does ruddy mean? It means red, to be red. It's the same word that described Esau. Esau was a hairy man. Esau was red in color. He had reddish skin. But ruddy, that word in Hebrew, can also mean red-haired. So it's possible that David had red hair. So again, this would have been unique. This would have been unusual. David was ruddy. He had beautiful eyes. He was handsome. So this is the description, the outward description of David. "And when David came into the room, the Lord said to Samuel, 'Arise, anoint him, for this is he.' Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day onward. And so the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, but Saul was still king. And now the Spirit of the Lord came upon David and was with David." Well, David is described repeatedly, even from before he was anointed to be king, as a man after God's own heart, who would do the will of God. Because remember, Saul had not done the will of God. Saul had taken matters into his own hands time and time again. So let's look at what is said about David even before he is anointed king. This is 1 Samuel 13, verse 14. "But now your kingdom shall not continue." He's speaking to Saul. "The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." So that's Saul. Saul is hearing, you are not a man after God's heart. You have taken things into your own hands. You have not kept the command of God. So God is seeking someone after his own heart. God is seeking someone who will obey obey him in the obedience of faith. Well, in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 13, there's a summary given. The Apostle Paul is speaking. He's giving a summary of the history of Israel, and he gives the summary of the kingdom of Saul being transferred to David to be the king of Israel. So this is Acts chapter 13, starting with verse 21. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. So there it is. A man after God's own heart is not just, oh, I love God and I sing songs to him all the time. Yes, that might be a part of it. And if you truly love God, you probably will sing a lot of songs to him all the time. But also included in that is doing the will of God. This course is the obedience of faith. David is exemplary in doing the will of God and obeying God because he believed God and trusted him. And that summary in the book of Acts goes on. Verse 36 says, For David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid with his fathers and saw corruption. So it goes on to describe that David fulfilled the purpose of God in his generation. You want to know a really great prayer to pray for yourself? Pray that you will fulfill the purpose of God in your generation. Pray that that is the deepest desire of your heart, no matter what it looks like, no matter how God wants to use you, that you would fulfill the purpose of God in your generation. That was the heart of David. See, David was a worshiper, and worship is not just songs, although David did write many, many songs, and that's where we get the majority of the book of Psalms. But worship is not just a song. Worship is a lifestyle. Worship is a way of life. Worship is understanding that all things come from God and that God deserves all our love, all our devotion, and all our obedience. And David knew this. He joyfully offered everything back to God continually for his purposes. He gave glory to God for everything that he did. So you can look at many of the Psalms. I've highlighted 3 here. Psalm 18 is a psalm that David wrote, and it's praising God when God finally gave him victory over Saul. It's praising God. The kingdom has come from you. You've given me victory over my adversary. He's praising God. He's giving all the glory to God. He's not saying, oh yes, I've known for 15 years that I was supposed to be the king of Israel, and I've been waiting for this. It's about time you gave me the kingdom, God. No, he sang a psalm. He sang it with joy and praise and thankfulness to God. And Psalm 65, he also gives thanks to God for God's abundant provision. Or Psalm 103, he's constantly, continually remembering all of God's benefits, all of God's blessings. David was thankful. David was thankful. He was constantly giving thanks to God, who was worthy of his praise and of his life. And significantly, this is another big contrast to Saul. David, as a leader, centered his life and the life of all Israel on worshiping the Lord. David's top priority in everything he did was the Lord, the house of the Lord, and the Ark of the Covenant. The first thing he did after being made king of all Israel was to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem so that they could seek the counsel of God for everything. He was leading the people in right and humble living as worshipers who offer themselves as servants to God. David was the leader, so he led people in following God and worshiping God. And he worshiped God so much, he was willing to look foolish and undignified and humiliated for publicly worshiping God with all his heart and all his soul. And this will be a familiar story. This is when David is bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, into this tent that he has pitched so that the Ark of the Covenant of God can be with him where he is. He just so so desired to be close to the presence of the living God. He didn't want it far away. He wanted it right where he was. He wanted to dwell with God and God dwell with him. So this is 2 Samuel chapter 6, starting with verse 14. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window, and she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So Michal judged David because he was dancing and shouting with praises for the God of all creation, the God of Israel. But she thought that this was totally undignified, and she judged him in her heart. We're at verse 17. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. So David is celebrating God. He's rejoicing in God. He is pouring out abundance from God to the people. He is absolutely overjoyed that the presence of the Most High God is with him and the people of Israel. He is revealing the goodness of God to the people of Israel and leading them in worship. We're at verse 20. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." So she's making fun of how probably while he was dancing and jumping and leaping for joy, his skirts probably came up or rose up, and she thought this was so vulgar, and she mocked and ridiculed him for it. We're at verse 21. And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord." So David is like, look, I'm the king of Israel, and I was rejoicing before the Lord. So I might have looked foolish to you, but I was rejoicing before the Lord, and nothing is going to stop me from worshiping God. He goes on, "And I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes." So the New King James says, "I will be even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in your eyes." He's like, I don't even care if you think I am an undignified fool. I don't care what you think about me. I'm worshiping God. And nothing was going to stop David from worshiping God with all his heart and all his soul. Well, he set up the ark in the tent of Jerusalem, and then he appointed leaders and musicians to continually offer worship day and night, offering praise to God. This was the first time that instruments were used in praising God. And the scripture references are there in your study guide. You can do your homework in your own time and look at them. But you can see there how David appointed musicians so that God would be continually praised. The Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, would constantly be surrounded by praise and thankfulness, to constantly show gratitude to the Lord, creator, maker of heaven and earth, who had chosen the people of Israel to be his own. And take note, the Ark of the Covenant was in Jerusalem with David in a tent that he had pitched for it himself. This is not exactly according to the pattern for the tabernacle, and the ark is supposed to be in the tabernacle. So it's not exactly according to the law of God, but his heart is bursting with love and joy over the Lord, that in the eyes of God, this is a pleasing thing. This is not an act of rebellion against the law of God. This is an act of love and worship that David wants the Ark of the Covenant to be near him where he is in Jerusalem. Now, in those days, the tabernacle was at Gibeon. And so David also appointed Zadok the priest and his brothers to be priests at the tabernacle and continue to offer all the sacrifices that were required in the law of Moses. Moses. So David was simultaneously obeying the law and keeping the Ark of the Covenant near him where he was. He honored the law of God. He honored the law of Moses. It was important to him. He did not disregard it, but he also kept the Ark of the Covenant near him because he honored and loved God and God's presence and the covenant that God had with his people Israel so much. Well, at the tent of the ark, David also led the people in his own praise and worship to the God of Israel. So let's look. This is 1 Chronicles 16. We're going to read quite a long passage, but I want you to hear in this. This is David giving a public speech. Imagine if your leader were standing before you and this is what they are saying. This is how they are leading the people in praising, worshiping God, and giving him glory. David was making a public address to the people of Israel, leading them in praise and thanksgiving to God. This is 1 Chronicles chapter 16, starting with verse 8. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him, sing praises to him, tell of all his wondrous works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his presence continually. Remember the wondrous works that he has done, his miracles and the judgments he has uttered. O offspring of Israel, his servant, children of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. Remember his covenant forever, the word that he commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant that he made with Abraham, his sworn promise to Isaac, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as your portion for an inheritance. When you were few in number, of little account, and sojourners in it, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people, he allowed no one to oppress them. He rebuked kings on their account, saying, touch not my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm. So David is remembering and recalling in front of all the people that God called and chose Abraham out of a world that had turned its back on God. God chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to enter into covenant with Israel as a people. And even when they were few in number and they were strangers in a strange land, which would have made them extremely vulnerable to armies that usually would have attacked them and expelled them from their land, instead, because God was with them, God spoke to the people of the lands in which they sojourned and said, touch not my anointed ones and do my prophets no harm. And now all these years later, David is remembering this before the people. We're at verse 23. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Tell of his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous works among all the peoples. So David is declaring the purpose of the Lord to redeem all the peoples, all the nations, and use his people Israel to bless all of the nations and restore all of the nations back to the God who created them. We're at verse 25. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and he is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and joy are in his place. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the peoples. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice, and let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. So again, God's eternal redemptive purpose for all the earth is for all the nations to know that the Lord reigns, the one who created heaven and earth, the God of Israel is the God of all creation. We're at verse 32. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. Yes, the day of judgment is coming. God is the one who will judge, and David knows it. He's proclaiming it to the peoples. We're at verse 34. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Say also, save us, O God of our salvation, and gather and deliver us from among the nations, that we may give thanks to your holy name and glory in your praise. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. So that was David's speech when he was at the ark in the tent that he had pitched for the ark of God to be with him in Jerusalem. Then all the peoples heard this speech and they said, Amen. And they praised the Lord. So David, as a leader, the Ark of the Covenant was central to his leadership. It was everything to him. And he led the people in worshiping God and valuing the covenant that the God who created heaven and earth had made with the people of Israel. Well, David, he didn't want God to live in a tent. It was in his heart to build a temple for the Lord, to honor the God of Israel. But it was not the will of God for him to build a temple, so he obeyed God in not building one. See, it's just as important that we obey God in what God tells us to do as it is that we obey God when he tells us not to do something. So let's look. This is 2 Samuel chapter 7, starting with verse 1. Now, when the king lived in his house and the Lord had given him rest from all his surrounding enemies, the king said to Nathan the prophet, See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent. And Nathan said to the king, Go, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. So David didn't think it was right for him to have a nice place to live, him to have a nice house, when the ark of God was in a tent. And he's saying, no, this isn't right. I am so much less than God. God should have a nicer place to dwell than I do. So it was in his heart to build a temple for God. But that same night, God sent Nathan back to tell him, no, you're not the one to build me a temple. So we'll pick up at verse 4. But that same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all my places where I have moved with all the people of Israel, did I speak a word with any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? See, God doesn't need a nice house to feel legitimate about himself. God doesn't need luxury to feel like he's the God of all creation. He knows he's the God of all creation. He's perfectly content with a tent. His desire, the desire of his heart, is to be with his people. That's what he desires. He's like, I don't care. I can live in a tent. I just want to be with my people, and I want to be glorified among my people by their obedience to my voice. That's the goal of God. But he also then told David that he was not the one to build the temple for him because he had shed too much blood in warfare. And he went on to tell David that he was going to raise someone up that would be of his descent who would be the Messiah of Israel. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this unit. But it becomes clear that David is not the one that was going to build the temple of God. So he wasn't allowed to do it. He knew that his son would do it and that one of his descendants was going to be raised up to have an eternal kingdom. So let's look at another aspect of David's life. David is a man of great faith. David had greater faith even as a teenage boy than any of the other men in all Israel. And his faith was that God could conquer Israel's enemies. So yes, this is the familiar story of David and Goliath. See, David didn't see things in terms of the earthly battle. David saw things by the power of God and the name of the Lord being with his people. David knew that the battle was the Lord's. The battle was the Lord's. Even in spite of impossible circumstances, David believed God. This is the opposite of what we we saw in the life of Saul. And remember, this is what we saw in the Battle of Jericho. God is able to do the impossible, the supernatural, the things that only God can do to give his people victory. Well, the story of David and Goliath, David is looking at the enemy who had all the rest of the army of Israel terrified, and he is not afraid. This is 1 Samuel 17, starting with verse 26. And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" So Goliath was about 13 feet tall. He was a giant. And David was a teenager, possibly not even fully grown yet as a man. But he was not afraid. He was not afraid. He said, that man is defying not Israel, but the God of Israel, and God will give us victory. See, that's faith. David did not rely on his own strength. He did not rely on his own counsel. He did not rely on his own abilities. He trusted in the name of God. God is moved by a heart of faith, not by someone who's trusting in their own abilities. David trusted in the name of the Lord, not in his own strength or abilities. So 1 Samuel 17, verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and so that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with a sword and a spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." So David is not relying on his own strength. He's not relying on the sword and the spear. He's relying on God, because God is looking to make a name for himself among all the nations of the earth. So David is believing that the same God who delivered Israel out of Egyptian slavery and conquered the most powerful army in the world in Israel's history, that same God will give him victory over Goliath, the giant. Well, throughout David's life, and no matter what hardship he faced, see, David faced many, many repeated hardships throughout his life, but in all the situations, David trusted God. And in your study guide, there's a list there of Psalms that specifically pertain to David trusting God. So I'm not going to read through the list. It's a list. You can go and read them on your own time. But as you read through these Psalms, you'll get an understanding of the character and the heart and the faith of David to trust God. But just some examples of David and how he relied upon the Lord. Psalm 23, a psalm of David. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He knows God is guiding his life like a shepherd guides sheep. Psalm 27, verse 1, a psalm of David. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" So a stronghold is like a tower that you run to when the enemy is attacking so that you can be safe and protected from the enemy. Whenever David was under attack, he ran to the Lord. Psalm 28, verse 7, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to him." Psalm 31, verse 1, a psalm of David. "In you, O Lord, I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me." So David is continually trusting in the Lord, putting his faith in God, not taking matters into his own hands. Again, remember the contrast to Saul. And just lastly, Psalm 37, verses 3 through 6. "Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness." He's saying, be faithful. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. He's saying, delight yourself in the Lord. Be delighted in God. Praise him. Thank him. Be joyous in the house of God. He says, commit your way to the Lord and trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. So David continually entrusted himself to the Lord, delighted himself in the Lord, and committed himself to the Lord. Lord in everything that he did, because David was a man after God's own heart, and David lived in the obedience of faith.